I was cleaning up this week, and this message, the second part of sound system, you guys remember what we spoke about last week, right? Ozzy brought along the first part of sound system, which was the sound desk. Alright, so if you look in the techno up there, you've got 4 different elements, okay? So you've got the first element, which is the sound desk. The second element is the light desk, and that's my bit tonight. And the third and the fourth elements you'll see. So the sound desk, you've got this big kind of machine, you've got these sliders, alright? So you've got different channels, okay? So you turn the volume up on that mic, that instrument, whatever. That's how the sound desk works. And what Wesley was saying last week is he was saying that sometimes in our lives, we can turn God down, or we can shut God off. You know, we know that God can speak to us in so many different ways, but sometimes we can be unwilling to hear from God. And in those situations, we literally are like turning the volume down. So that even though God's blatantly trying to say something to us, we don't listen. And it's up to us in our lives to invest in turning that volume up and constantly being in tune with what God is saying. And we recognise the fact that God can speak to us in many different ways, and Ozzy went through a few examples of that. You know, He can speak to you through people, other people, that happens a lot. You know, situations like I had this week, you know, God was clearly trying to say something to me. I don't think I've quite exactly got around in my head, you know, exactly what that was. I'm still praying about it, I'm still thinking about it, but God was clearly trying to say something to me. And Ozzy spoke about how He can speak to you through songs, through music, all these different aspects, all these different elements. And at the end of the day, you say it, you name it, God can speak through it in a lot of situations. Every individual will have their own examples of how God has spoken to them, and they can be from as simple as a prayer to, I don't know, a sports match. I don't know. You've heard people come up here and use analogies from sport because God has spoken to them through that particular sporting event or that individual sport itself. It could be anything. And so that was what last week was about how God can speak to us through this sound desk and how we have the opportunity to really turn up that volume and really tune into what God is saying. Does that make sense, yeah? Right, so part 2, this week, it's the light desk, okay? So on this light desk, it actually looks very similar to the sound desk, although instead of turning up volume, what are you turning up? The lights, exactly. And I don't know whether the camera could fade the lights for me, like you learned to do this week. You could fade them off and on again. There you go. So, do you know what? Leave them off for a second, okay? And I'm going to carry on talking for a little bit, okay? Now, this perhaps can represent a life where we're going about our daily business. You know, we might be doing the right thing or the wrong thing. But we aren't allowing God into that situation. We aren't allowing God to tune into us and us to tune into God and hear what He is trying to say and say about our lives, about the purpose He has for our lives, about where He wants us to go, what He wants us to do. This is what this represents, alright? And you remember a few months ago, actually, I don't know whether you remember the exact message, but I was talking about the idea of investigating. The message was along the lines of actually, you know, our lives can be represented like books. So you've heard me say our lives can be represented as houses, buckets. This time it's a book, alright? I'm not going to recap that message completely, but the idea was this. You've got this book, alright? You've got this book, and our lives are like books. So God literally opens the book and reads our lives and shows us those areas where perhaps we need work, those areas where we're doing well. And the line in the song that comes from literally says, "Shine your light upon the darkest place in me." Thank you, Cameron. You can shine the lights back on now if you wish. I feel like I'm talking to a lot of empty seats. Thank you, I can see you one now. And I'm also blinded. So that's the concept of this song. You've got these books, and God shines His light into all the different areas of our lives, and He reads our lives like that, okay? So for example, you know, with me, I always talk about how, you know, there was a stage where I wasn't exactly doing what God wanted me to do, the kind of things that God wanted me to do. I wasn't exactly fulfilling His purpose for that stage in my life. And you could say that there was a lot that God needed to shine His light on, but I probably wasn't letting Him. You know, a lot of you have been here on a Sunday and you see we have communion. And one of the things that Pastor Mark and Pastor Nigel often say when we come to that time is that this is a time for self-examination. Alright? And when we say self-examination, actually what we really mean is stepping back for a second, zoning out everything else, And it's a personal moment between you and God where you say, God, show me where I'm going wrong. Because I want to make things right with you. It's about getting right with God before we take the communion. And I think that's a fantastic way of entering into communion on a Sunday. But you know, we need to be having that conversation with God on a daily basis, on a continual basis. You hear me talk about this constant conversation with God all the time. Because one of the things, you know, as I've been leading the youth for the past year, one of the things I've really kind of focused on is really engaging with God on a daily basis, and really having that relationship with God. And for a long time I was trying to put it into words as a simple way of describing it. And eventually I got this idea of the constant conversation, because that's what it's like. We need to be having that constant conversation with God. And I'm going to get a volunteer, and I'm going to do the same demonstration I usually do. So can I have one volunteer? Denzel, give Denzel a round of applause. Right. I think last time I did this, it was Alfie. It was Alfie I did this with. Right, okay, here we go. So Denzel, up on the stage. This over here, on this side of the stage, represents our home life. No, our church. It represents our church. Everywhere else represents everywhere else. He represents our home life, our work life, our school life, our family life, our love life, everything. What you do in your social time. So, everyone recognises that when we come here and we sing on a Sunday, we sing on a Friday, we fellowship, we do all this kind of stuff, everyone recognises that God is there amongst us, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah, thumbs up, yeah. Everyone recognises that, okay? Some people, they think that, Denzel, for example, he thinks, I'm not saying you really do, but just for the purpose of this demonstration, Denzel is convinced that when he leaves this place, off a drop, 2v5, you know, that God stays here. And then Denzel goes through his week, you know, he's trotting around like he does. And then he comes back to church on a Sunday, and he's like, hey God, nice to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. How you been? Oh yeah, my week's not been too good. Oh no, I did that wrong. I'm sorry about that. That's the way some people think it works, alright? So that conversation that I was having there, you know, with God, as it were, oh, you know, I know I messed up in that situation, I'm sorry, I've asked for forgiveness, I know you've forgiven me, and I will do better next time. He then leaves again. And he probably goes and makes the same mistake. But the thing is, right, what a relationship with God means is this. Come on, Denzel. Come back to church. Now this is all really happens, okay? In our relationship with God, if we are having that constant conversation with God, alright, this is what it's going to look like. Denzel's going to be walking around his everyday life. He's going to look quick. He's going to leave church, and God's going to be there with him, alright? God's going to be there with him. We know that is the case anyway, but sometimes God's here, Denzel's in his everyday life, and he doesn't tune in. He forgets that God's there. God's always there anyway, and whether or not we tune in is a different story altogether. Thank you very much, Denzel. Give me a round of applause. You see, the thing is, this constant conversation with God is, for example, you know, you're in a situation at school where perhaps, you know, your friends are doing something they shouldn't be. The typical example of that for me was, you know, all these people picking on one individual. Because, you know what it's like when you're with your friends, you kind of take the mick out of each other, and there's probably one person that everyone takes the mick out of the most, if that makes sense. Everyone kind of throws the dirt on the most, alright? And it's in those situations, you know, when I started to develop that relationship with God, when I started to develop that constant conversation with God, it's in those situations where God kind of said, actually, should you really be joining in with that? Because at first, I would do exactly the same thing. You know, I would join in with the shouting and the jeering and the laughing and the jokes and all that. But when I came back from, I think it was one youth camp that year, I think literally the first week of school was a completely different thing. Because I was in these environments, I was in these situations, and suddenly I wasn't just going through this not feeling guilty about it. God was there, and I was tuning into God, and He was saying, actually, you know you shouldn't be doing that. Is what you're saying there really glorifying me? And that was the constant conversation that started to develop. And so it wasn't even just in those situations, you know, in my home life. If someone was getting on my nerves, I don't know, I'm not naming any names, I would bite my tongue more often. I'm not saying I do it all the time. I'd bite my tongue more often because God was in that room with me. I was having that conversation with God, and He was kind of saying, Ryan, calm yourself down a little bit. Just hold your tongue, watch your words, all right? And you can think of all these different situations. If you're on a football pitch, because that for me was the thing, right? You know, like a lot of young teenagers, I used to swear. I'm going to be honest, I used to swear, okay? You guys can all be like, no, I don't swear, man, I don't swear. Okay, right, I know some of you don't, but anyway, I know I did at a certain age. And one of the things that was probably the worst thing for me was when I was playing sport and when I was being competitive, okay? Say, for example, someone gives me a bad tap on the back of my leg when I was playing football. Anyway, we won't go any further than that. But in those situations, before I started to develop this constant conversation with God wasn't, in a sense, God was probably trying to tell me that what I was doing was wrong, but I wasn't listening to it. I wasn't allowing God to shine His light in that situation and show me where I was going wrong. And suddenly when I came back, I mean, it was one particular youth camp where I had a real breakthrough, and I think I've really started to develop this relationship with God. And I came back and I started playing football again, and things were completely different, because when someone might, rub me up the wrong way, or whatever, or get on my nerves, or get on the wrong side, yes, my initial reaction, my initial instinct was probably to do the same thing, but rather than just doing it and not feeling bad about it, if I did, I would feel awful, because I knew that God was there telling me that was not the right thing to do. And over time, I eventually started to develop this relationship further and further, to the point where I wasn't making the same mistakes, that actually I was thinking about my reaction before the things even happened, if that makes sense. I was able to say, God, okay, you know what, I commit this day to you, and in these particular situations that might occur, I want to be able to do the right thing. I want to be able to do the thing that glorifies you, rather than just making the same mistakes that I've always made. And that is a process. I'm not telling you that it happens overnight. I'm not telling you that as soon as I came back from that youth camp, when I left here on Friday, whenever it was, I'm not telling you that as soon as I came back, everything was fine. And I stopped making those same mistakes, and actually I started doing the right thing all the time. That's not the way it works. It's a process, but it's about starting that process, okay? You can't finish the process or let the process develop without actually saying, God, I want to start that process, all right? So that's an important decision that we all need to make. But what I'm saying is this: in our lives, in our books, these pages represent these different areas of our life, okay? We need to come back at the end of each and every day, at the beginning of each and every day, and say, actually, God, show me where I'm going wrong. And that's the first aspect of this idea of the light desk. And there's actually a Bible verse I want to focus on for the second part of this message, which is Psalms 32, verse 8. It says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way which you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to keep this next bit very brief, but there's two elements of this light. You've got what I was talking about a minute ago with how God can shine His light in the areas of our lives where perhaps we need work, or we need improvement. But there's a second element of it, okay? Who remembers the Planeshaker song, Running After You? Yeah, Running After You. I know that Owen likes that song. I think we've done it a couple of times on a Friday when Owen's done the worship set. But basically the first verse, I'm not singing it, the first verse is, your word is a light unto my path. Is it your light or something after that? I've just forgotten the words now. I usually know all the words to songs, but that's basically the idea of that first verse. And there's other songs like that which talk about God's word being like a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Not only does it mean that God will examine our lives and show us where we're going wrong, it means that actually He will direct us as to where to go. Because for me, there are two key elements in this relationship with God that we're talking about. The first one is that personal thing, where actually God will have that conversation with you. You'll have that personal conversation with God, and He will tell you where you're going wrong, and you, by His strength, will look to fix those problems and look to do better in those situations. But the second element is this. So that's an internal thing. That's something that goes inward. The second element of it is the outward, because God has called you to go and then use what He has done in your life to bless people. Alright? You remember my last message was filled up about overflow, and how, we fill ourselves up with God's word, by praying, by worshipping, by investing in our relationship with God. And then we spill out and affect those around us. Okay? But the second element of this message I'm talking about tonight is very similar. Okay? We are called for a purpose to go and reach the people around us. Okay? But God will guide us with His light. If the lights are off, if the camera's upstairs against the lights, don't worry about it now. If those lights are off, and we know that God's got a purpose for our lives, that's one of the first things that we hear. When we come to church for the first time perhaps, or as we're brought up in church, one of the first things that we hear is that God has a plan for our lives. That God wants to use us for a specific purpose. He's called us all to go and be disciples, to go and make disciples and bring people to Christ. But individually, He might have called us to a specific area of ministry. For example, I know that God had called me to work with young people. You guys know that. God has called Ozzy to go and help people in the public domain. Some people might be called to go and reach the young, even the young kids. Some people will be called to be pastors, which means reaching people of all different ages. Alright? And all different areas of your life, you can go and bless people. You work in the police force, you can go and minister to people. You can go and bring disciples. God has a plan for each and every one of your lives. But if you know that, if you know that God's got a plan for your life, but the lights are off, and you have no direction from God, how on earth are you going to know where to go? You're going to wake up every morning thinking, okay, God, I recognise you've got a plan for my life. I'm not even sure I know what that is. I don't know where to go. What kind of a walk with God is that? It's up to us in those individual conversations, not only to let God examine our lives, but to let God shine His light to our path. Let Him give us direction. Let Him give us vision. Let Him give us purpose. So when we wake up every single morning, we know what God wants us to do with our day. Yeah. God will tell us what the long-term goal is. You know, like I said, I knew from a very young age that God had called me into youth ministry. I knew when I was in the early stages of secondary school that God had called me into youth ministry. And to be honest, I wasn't in a position where I could then go and lead the youth ministry at that age. I wasn't there yet. It could be that something God calls an 8-year-old to go and be a fireman, to go and save people in that way. But how is an 8-year-old going to go straight away and sign up to the fire brigade? How is that not going to work, is it? Because there is a process that begins. God does work, God shapes us, God builds our character, God moulds us as a person, so that at the right time we are ready to go and do what He has called us to do. Cameron, you might just head upstairs because we're running out of time. We come towards the end of this, but what I'm saying is this: without direction, without God's light, without us turning up those lights and that light that's and allowing God to direct us, we're pretty much going to stay wherever we are. We're not going to be able to move forward. So guys, I encourage you, start each and every day by doing two things, alright? And even if you don't pray at the beginning of the day, even if you pray at the end of the day, do two things, alright? Do two things. The first thing is this: you pray that prayer, you say, God, my life is an open book. Come and investigate my life. Come and show me where I'm going wrong. Come and show me where I'm doing well, because God will give you encouragement. That's the first thing. Allow God to investigate your life. And the second thing is this: God, give me direction. I don't know whether you guys do business studies at all, but you've got two different types of aims and objectives. I can't remember which way around it is. You've got a long-term one and you've got a short-term one. I'm pretty sure the aim is the long-term and the objective is the short-term. All right? So, in a sense, God may give you a plan for your life, a specific plan. I want you to do this, I want you to do that. And if you ask God, He will do that for you in the right time. But He may give you that plan, and that is your long-term aim of what you know God wants you to do with your life. There will be things that God doesn't tell you. There will be things that God doesn't tell you, but He will give you the overall aim. But for each and every day, you should have those objectives from God, alright? So, for example, if you feel like you're not doing, if God is telling you you're not doing particularly well in a certain area of your life, it could be a sin or a habit that you're struggling with. It could be an area where your friends are causing you trouble, or where you're causing your friends trouble, or you're not working hard enough in school, you're not treating your parents like you should. Whatever area it is, God can give you those short-term objectives in order to reach that long-term aim. Because He wants to build you up. He wants to build you up. You guys may think, well, actually, I'm only 11, 12, 13, 14. I don't know what God wants to do in my life. Here's a challenge to my guys. Ask Him. Ask Him what He wants you to do with your life. What He wants to do with you. And I'll tell you something, He will start that process. You know, I'll tell you something, He's been building you up anyway. He's been building you up already. But what an incredible feeling it is to know exactly where God is sending you, where God is directing you, where His light is shining, what direction He's pointing you in. What an incredible thing to be in connection, to be in relationship with God as you go through that process, as you reach those long-term objectives, the short-term objectives, in order to reach that long-term aim which God has for your life. I can vouch that tonight, that is an incredible feeling. It's a real blessing, and I encourage you guys tonight, as you just want to stand to your feet, you just want to pray and do one final song. I encourage you guys tonight to have that conversation with God. You know, we've had many messages over the last few months, over the last year, and it's been about all different things, about relationship, about prayer, about worship, about how God has a plan for your life, about how He loves you, how He cares about you, how He's created you in His own image, in order for you to fulfill a purpose for your life. But have you ever had that conversation with God? Have you ever kind of said, God, you know, I recognise the plan for my life, and so I know why I'm here. But I don't feel like I know what direction you want me to go in. I feel like I know exactly where your light is pointing. You know, I've turned up that light desk. I've put those lights on. I've allowed you to come and examine my life. I've allowed you to come and guide my path. But I don't feel like you've ever told me what it is you're going to do. I encourage you guys tonight to pray that prayer and to ask God. It may not be that He answers you straight away. It may not be that as soon as you pray that prayer, God comes into your head and He said, actually, this is what I want you to do. It may be that months, years down the line, something clicks in your mind, and you know that that is what God has wanted you to do, because He's spoken to you. I encourage you guys to, even right where you are, use this moment as a personal moment between you and God. And whether it be about examining your own life, whether it be about looking at, you know, the book of your life and letting God tell you where you're going or doing right. Or whether it be God giving you direction, short term and long term. I encourage you guys to use this time. And as we go into this final song, be in tune with God. Connect with God. Use this opportunity to connect with God.
I go and I return. I've seen your holy